Egypt are through to the last 16 of the World Cup, and Australia are heading home, eliminated in heartbreak after one of the most dramatic penalty shootouts of this entire tournament. Welcome to FairPlay, Football AI Review. Tonight we are breaking down every moment, every decision, and every missed penalty from this round of 32 clash at Dallas Stadium. This was a knockout match with enormous stakes for both sides. Australia arrived as the second-placed finishers from their group, knowing that a win here would deliver a round of 16 berth against almost certainly one of the tournament heavyweights. Egypt came through as one of the best third-placed teams from the group stage, carrying the weight of African football's expectations and the extraordinary burden of carrying Mohamed Salah into his likely final World Cup. The Socceroos carried some genuine momentum into this game. Tony Popovic's side had beaten Turkey and Saudi Arabia in qualifying, and their group stage form showed a team capable of grinding out results. Egypt, however, had injury concerns throughout their squad, 5 players listed as unavailable to us, and much of their creative burden rested on a 34-year-old Salah who had carried this nation on his back for the better part of a decade. Tony Popovic set his side up in a 3-4-2-1, with Alessandro Cercati, Harry Sutar, and Lucas Harrington forming the back three. Jordan Boss and Aziz Behich provided width as wing-backs, Aidan O'Neill and Jackson Irvine sat as the double pivot in central midfield, and Christian Volpato and Nestori Irankunda supported a lone striker in Connor Metcalfe. It was a system designed to be defensively solid, hard to break down, and dangerous on the counter through the energy of Irankunda and Volpato. Egypt's coach Hossam Hussein deployed a 4-4-2 with Salah and Omar Marmoush leading the line and Imam Ashur and Marwan Ataya supporting from midfield. Karim Hafez and Mohamed Hani anchored the defensive line with Rami Rabia and Yasser Ibrahim. The intent was clear: use Salah's intelligence and movement to drag Australia's back three out of shape, while Ashur arrived late from midfield to exploit the space created. The structural mismatch between Australia's 5 defenders when they dropped deep and Egypt's front 2 created a fascinating duel in transition. When Australia won the ball, Egypt's 2 holding midfielders were tasked with cutting off the wingbacks, but Australia's inside forwards, Volpato and Irankunda, could drift into pockets behind Egypt's midfield line. The question was whether Australia could exploit those pockets quickly enough before Egypt reset their defensive shape. Australia started the game in controlled fashion, maintaining their shape and looking to hit Egypt on the break. The opening exchanges were fairly even, with both teams probing rather than committing. The sellout crowd of 70,244 inside Dallas Stadium in sweltering 37-degree heat seemed to sense this was a match that would be decided by a single moment of quality, and it was not long before it arrived. Egypt took the lead in the 13th minute through a goal that showed exactly the kind of intelligent movement Hossam Hussein had designed his system around. Mohamed Salah flicked a quick free kick into the box. The initial strike from Ashur was blocked, but Karim Hafez collected the rebound on the right side and delivered a floating cross toward the back post. Imam Ashur had ghosted away from his marker and headed home powerfully from close range. It was his second goal of this World Cup, making him only the 3rd Egyptian player in history to score multiple goals at a single tournament, joining Abdelrahman Fawzi from 1934 and Salah himself from 2018. Australia should have created more before the interval. Nestori Irankunda was lively throughout the first half, generating 6 total shot attempts, and Christian Volpato found pockets of space in the Egyptian half on several occasions. One Volpato effort rattled the woodwork, the clearest indication that the Socceroos were dangerous when they moved the ball quickly. But the composure to convert was simply not there in those first 45 minutes. At the break, Egypt held a 1-0 lead that felt deserved but fragile. Australia had shown enough in the first half to suggest they could find an equalizer, but they needed a shift in tempo and a greater willingness to commit bodies into the final third. Popovic would have told his team that the game was far from over, and the statistics backed that view. Australia's expected goals of 0.99 across the whole match shows they were always within range. Australia came out of the break with renewed urgency, and it was immediately apparent that Popovic had told his players to press Egypt higher up the pitch. Kai Truan had come on at halftime for Jordan Boss, freshening the right wing-back position, and Australia looked more aggressive in their defensive line. In the 55th minute, the match changed in two ways simultaneously. Aidan O'Neill floated a free kick towards the Egypt penalty area, and Mohamed Hani, under pressure, directed the ball into his own net. Level at 1-1, and the goal came just minutes after Hani had been involved in a collision with Connor Metcalfe, lying on the ground receiving treatment for what appeared to be a possible concussion. The Egyptian defender stayed on the pitch but would have been in no fit state to deal with the aerial ball. It was a deeply unfortunate moment, and it made Hani the first player in World Cup history to score 2 own goals in the same tournament, having also put one past his own goalkeeper in Egypt's group stage draw against Belgium. Popovic made 2 further substitutions at the 74th minute, withdrawing Volpato and Iran Kunda for Ajdin Hrustic and Mohamed Touré. The 106th minute saw Egypt lose Omar Marmoush to fatigue, Hamza Abdelkarim coming on to provide fresh legs up front. At the 119th minute, Popovic made the most consequential decision of his tournament, bringing on Matthew Ryan, his specialist penalty goalkeeper, in place of Patrick Beach, who had played 119 extraordinary minutes, recording 14 saves across the match. Extra time itself was largely attritional. Australia had the ball more frequently, pressing Egypt's back 4 repeatedly, but the Pharaohs were organized and disciplined. Neither side managed a breakthrough in the additional 30 minutes, so it went to penalties. And from the opening kick, the shootout was defined by Australian misfortune. Harry Sautar stepped up first and missed an immediate psychological blow. Mahmoud Saber converted for Egypt to make it 1-0 in the shootout. Jackson Irvine steadied Australia with a composed finish to level it at 1-1. Rami Rabia put Egypt back ahead at 1-2. Awer Mabil, who had been brought on specifically to take a penalty, stepped up and scored to make it 2-2. Then Mohamed Salah, in a moment that encapsulated everything this Egyptian team means to their nation, calmly sent his penalty into the net to make it 2-3. Lucas Harrington stepped up, needing to score to keep Australia alive, but his effort failed to find the net. Hossam Abdelmaguid scored Egypt's final kick with complete composure to confirm the 4-2 victory. Australia's possession across the full 120 minutes was 42% compared to Egypt's 58%, a gap that reflects Egypt's technical superiority in keeping the ball, particularly in the first half. Egypt completed 613 accurate passes from 722 attempts, an 85% accuracy rate, compared to Australia's 403 from 505. What those numbers obscure is that when Australia did have the ball, they were more direct and more dangerous in the box, 11 shots inside the box to Egypt's 8. Australia generated 16 total shots across the match compared to Egypt's 14, which on first glance might suggest greater attacking threat from Popovic's men. But the expected goals tell the real story. Australia finished at 0.99, Egypt at 1.09. These were 2 teams evenly matched in their ability to create genuine danger, which made the shootout a genuinely fair way to settle it. Patrick Beach's extraordinary 14 saves, many of them coming in regulation time and extra time, were the only reason Australia were even in this match. The outstanding performer across both teams on the night was Patrick Beach. The Australian goalkeeper finished with 14 saves, a simply extraordinary number for a World Cup knockout match, and several of those interventions were from point-blank range, keeping Australia competitive in a match they could easily have lost by 3 or 4 goals in normal time. His contribution was one of the finest individual goalkeeping performances in Australian World Cup history. The player who underperformed on the night was Mohamed Salah. The Egypt captain managed only 1 shot on target across 120 minutes, registered 0 assists, and looked restricted by his own physical limitations compared to the player who devastated this same tournament format in 2018. He did convert his penalty with customary nervelessness, But for long stretches, this felt like a team playing without their supposed talisman in any meaningful offensive sense. Tony Popovich's decision to withdraw Patrick Beach in the 119th minute for Matthew Ryan was one of the bravest and most debated tactical choices of the tournament. Ryan is a specialist in penalty situations and carries enormous experience. But Egypt converted every single one of their 4 kicks against him, and his introduction failed to make the difference Popovich had hoped for. The counterpoint is that Beach's 14 saves kept Australia in the game to reach that moment. Without Beach, there would have been no shootout to gamble on. Head-to-head between these two nations, this was a genuinely rare meeting on the biggest stage. Egypt now hold the psychological upper hand after this penalty victory, but the more significant historical note is that this was Egypt's first World Cup knockout stage victory since the tournament expanded. For a nation of Salah's stature to have struggled to reach this point, the breakthrough carries enormous meaning. Australia's recent form across the qualification campaign was genuinely impressive. Wins over Japan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, a 5-1 demolition of Indonesia. But this World Cup showed a team still finding the consistency to translate promise into knockout stage results. Their group stage saw them draw with Paraguay and lose to the United States before getting through as runners-up. Tonight's elimination, despite Beach's heroics, revealed that the gap between aspirant nations and established international powers remains meaningful. Australia are eliminated. Tony Popovich's side finish with 4 points from the group stage and 1 win in the knockout round. They simply could not convert their chances when it mattered. Their World Cup ends with extraordinary individual moments. Beach's saves, Irankunda's energy, Metcalf's goal, but without the clinical edge the biggest matches demand. The Socceroos will rebuild, and this core of players will be experienced enough to push harder in the next cycle. Egypt face Argentina next, and the challenge could not be harder. Messi arrives with 7 goals in this tournament, and Argentina are arguably the most complete team remaining. For Egypt to advance, they will need Ashur to find that same clinical touch, their defensive organization to remain resolute, and perhaps more of the kind of collective courage they showed after Hani's dismissal tonight. It will take something close to perfect to eliminate the world champions. This match was ultimately a story about resilience meeting misfortune. Australia played with heart, got their equalizer, and were undone by 2 missed spot kicks in a shootout that was always going to be a lottery. The decisive moment was that first penalty, the moment Sautar's effort failed to find the net and the psychological initiative immediately shifted to Egypt. That is your full breakdown from FairPlay. Football AI Review. Egypt march into the last 16 to face Argentina, while Australia face the long journey home. The tournament's next chapter promises to be just as dramatic, and we will be here for every moment of it. That's the FairPlay verdict on this one. If you want more analysis like this, follow us. Find us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok at FairPlay AI, and follow Anthony personally on X at Anthony Fairplay. See you next match.